Hello, I'm Slikat and welcome back to the second channel video. So I've always thought it's kind of strange just how much value we assign to the concept of a country or to the concept of a nationality. The idea that being from France means one thing or being French means one particular thing, yet when you're from Paris, yet when you're from Corsica, they're very different things. They aren't really linked together. In fact, a lot of people are more like another country than they are like their own, and that seems to be why we attach such a high value to the idea of like, oh, this person's from Bosnia, or oh, you're going to Japan, are you? And yes, I am going to Japan. Here we are, by the way. And there are so many ways you can illustrate this point too. There are many countries which have what are basically independent nations within their own border. Look at China, for example, and the many asterisks that come when talking about them. Look at many countries which are, are the reverse, where even though they're independent countries technically, they're more like each other really than they are like some parts of themselves. Take the Baltics, for instance, take maybe Malaysia and Singapore, take a whole bunch of different countries around the world, and you'll start to see how really the concept of a country being the decider between what's different and what's not doesn't really make sense. It only makes sense if you're trying to talk about what a unit of governance is in the sense of like how many people can be controlled by one person or one group of people, and that's not what you're talking about when you talk about a nationality or when you talk about an ethnicity. And I figured rather than ranting about this forever, because it's something that's been on my mind, wouldn't it be more fun to take a country which is fairly homogenous, say Japan. It's fairly small, it's fairly homogenous. You think of it as being one big place, but even in a place like Japan, there are so many different extremes, and I think it'd be kind of fun to go to each of these extremes, say the northernmost extreme, the easternmost extreme, the westernmost extreme, the southernmost extreme, and even though we're not going to the very, very tips, the fact that it can be so different despite only going fairly far in each of those directions should hopefully prove a point. So right now I'm in Sapporo. This is part of Hokkaido, which is Japan's northernmost prefecture or province, and basically as a result of the fact that it's so far removed in climate, you see a lot of differences in culture in terms of how things are connected and in terms of everything like that. Partly because the city was only built 150 years ago. Despite being a city of many millions today, it didn't exist 150 years ago. It was built kind of as a way to control the rest of the prefecture. Again, long history on this one, but it basically means that there is a central park with a grid system emanating out from it. And does that sound familiar to you at all? So before I can show you any of the rest of Sapporo, let me just start by saying this video is sponsored by Skillshare. I'll be talking about them later on the video. It's pretty cool, but link down below, talk about it later. Let's dive into the rest of Sapporo. Anyway, let me show you a few different points around Sapporo, starting, by the way, with this big station over here. This is Sapporo main station. As you can see, it's got a fairly traditional-ish look, but then, I don't know, there's a big tower coming out of it, and I know, I think this place is kind of nice. Shows the grid system off, shows that it's cold, shows that it's well connected. So usually when I get into a brand new city, right after checking into my hotel, I go out and I get a good view. But in this particular case, by the way, just worth noting that this hotel room is extra small because Japanese hotel rooms tend to be. But in my particular case, it seems as though my hotel room comes with a view. It's only 32nd floor, and you can see, well, I mean, you can see how much we could see if it wasn't so foggy or snow foggy, whatever it's called. On a good day, you're meant to be able to see all of this. Today we get to see that much. So this hotel has a card reader, right? So you have to hover your card over it and then you can press your floor. But instead of having to press your floor manually, you put your card over and it knows where you're staying. Why does every hotel not do this? This, by the way, is Hokkaido's answer to the Eiffel Tower, Eiffel Tower's great, but does it have a giant clock on it? Plus, I mean, is it like red and green? I mean, I don't actually like the colours, but the clock's useful, you can't take that away from it, right? It's also quite small. Okay, it's quite small, it's not great colours, but it has a clock, so beats the Eiffel Tower there, I think you'll find. Although I do have to admit there are some pretty great views up here, as you can see as my face slowly goes anonymous, but still, look at that, it's beautiful. Good stuff, good vantage point. I'm now in Hakodate, and yeah, I'm going to be staying overnight here. even though places like this were built a long time ago before modern technology, I still feel like they were kind of built to be enjoyed by Google Maps, which I'll show you on screen right now. It's just beautiful, isn't it? Kind of fits the theme of this channel when you think about it.
And now, a quick intermission for Food ASMR with Toy Cat.
So next up we have the East, except the East of Japan is kind of a tricky thing to define. Looking at it on a map, you can easily see how, like, you know, there isn't really that much of an East, but I'm in the region of Japan oftenly known as the East of Japan, or Northeast, or honestly, you know, given that there is like just a lot of East, let's call it the Middle East because it's a more accurate geographic term than the actual Middle East. Anyway, with that said, let's now talk about the East of Japan, because the interesting about this part of Japan is, you know, all of the things that you hear about, like, oh yeah, well they're so great with the rail and the this and the that, don't really apply here because of the low population density. Japan is a place which is very, very densely packed for the most part. It's like Tokyo, Osaka, all these big cities, but outside of Sendai, this region is mostly sparsely populated, which means that even the trains here, for instance, are not, you know, on the same frequencies or the same size, scale, etc. It's single track for the most part, with like hourly-ish trains, sort of. You know, they're kind of rough compared to their competitors in the mainland because that functions on population density. Most of Japan has very high population density, but that's not true in certain parts, and the East Japan already proves that. Even though it's very Japanese culturally, it's still very different in terms of the lifestyle and how things tend to go on here. Just as another quick point, this is something that is often referred to as one of the best free views in Japan, and I see a lot of people get mad about that, like, no, it's in your opinion one of the best free. There are way better things you can see, but no, there is actually an official designation for this. There is something called the official free views of Japan. I don't know why someone decided there could only be free views, but there is officially free views in Japan. This is one of them. And you can honestly kind of see why, right? Like, it is beautiful, it is worthy of that designation, and yeah, so that's the thing you get right here. This part of Japan, even though again very Japanese on most levels, is very different when it comes to the lifestyle. It's very different when it comes to the infrastructure, and it's very different when it comes to what I would just call the beauty. So yeah, different in all those different ways. Oh yeah, just in case you're all curious, by the way, this is Matsushima Bay. That's one of the three designated views. Hey kitty cat. Something else in the east of Japan is this cat island, as it's colloquially known. There's around 100 people and decreasing living here, and around 400 cats and increasing, because you know how cats be when you leave them on an island. And, yeah, interesting thing about this island is there's just cats everywhere, and they're all friendly. Like, there's one just over here next to me, and look, he wants to be friends with me. There's one here on the ground just in front of me, and look what a friendly little cat he is too. Like, they seem to know each other. Cats, am I right? But no, it's adorable, seeing all the cats, but because of just how many cats they have and because the locals believe it gives them good luck, there is something called a cat shrine here. I mean, you don't need to call it a cat shrine. I mean, like, you can see it's a shrine to cats, right? And it's the most adorable thing about Japan that you find all the way here in the east. And the cool thing about this island is not just the fact that, like, it's full of cats, what a cool tourist destination. Pro tip, by the way, don't feed the cats. I've seen so many YouTube videos being like, oh, make sure you bring this food or that food. No, don't feed them. They're fed, like, well enough. The locals don't want you to feed the cats here. But the other interesting thing about this island, besides just like, okay, so there's more cats than people, what a wacky little concept. But the other crazy thing in my the cats just they're playing with each other, I think. But the other wacky things about the island, in my opinion, are the fact that even though it has less than 100 people, it's still pretty well put together. There's still a hospital, there's still a few stores, there's still vending machines you can buy drinks at. It's still got that convenience culture. There's like literally being an island quite a way away from everything, filled with cats. You've still got the things that you're going to need. There's still a very regular ferry service to the mainland, and I think that's kind of cool, personally.
There are 8 cars on this train. Cars 1, 2, and 3 are for passengers without seat reservations. Smoking is not allowed on this train, except in the designated smoking rooms located luggage on the overhead shelf. Please be careful when you lift your luggage, as it may fall. If you would like to put your luggage behind the seats at the last row,
いつに降りますか。次は仙台に停まります。
So I'm currently on the train between Fukuoka and Nagasaki, and the really interesting thing about this train, as opposed to the rest of the ones I've seen in the world really, is the fact that it's actually every carriage is divided into two, and in between that is where you get the toilets. So instead of having toilets at the end of each carriage, they're right in the middle, and they're separated by women and men. So yeah, there's male toilets, there's female toilets, there's no crossing between those two things. But then also, we've got two mirrors. Kinda cool, right? Endless mirrors. This is the green car section, by the way, and I really can't work out if this is really nice or really the opposite of that. So tell me what you think. I have a green pass. If you don't know, it's only a tiny bit more to go around Japan in first class. And it's strange, but it's nice not to have any neighbours, I guess, and to be in a pretty much deserted carriage. Now for the west of Japan, I'm actually on the island of Kyushu. Just over there actually is the westernmost point on the entire JR network. So fun fact for you right there, but I'm near Nagasaki, a place that is famous for two things, two big events, both of which have kind of shifted the west of Japan in a lot of different ways. The first one is obviously the fact that it was one of the very first ports to open to outside traders. Japan was very adamant for a very long time that they would not deal with the world basically, and one of the first places that changed was Nagasaki, and because of that, this area has a lot more kind of imported culture than the rest, including, like I said, it's a Dutch theme park. I'll show you around in a second because it's one of the most interesting things to this part of Japan in my opinion. But as well as that, you can see how there's a lot of the things that are imported in a similar way. Like, I mean, even the train you get here with, like, it's bright orange, looks European style, right? Like, again, this place has been open for longer than the rest of Japan because at first Japan only opened in a few ports, one of which was around here. And you also see like the modern day tourism is very different to the rest of Japan as well. When you're in the central or east regions of Japan, Tokyo or Osaka, there are international flights to both of those airports, or all three of the biggest airports in Japan, Tokyo, and Osaka. All three of those airports get huge flights from pretty much every continent on Earth. However, to get to Fukuoka, which is the nearest big airport around here, you can pretty much only do so from other Asian airports. So there's a lot of people here from, say, China, say, Korea. So the modern day demographics are also kind of changed. So yeah, that's why instead of just seeing like, oh yeah, English alongside Japanese, you see Japanese alongside Korean, alongside other languages. And then you also see a lot of not just, oh yeah, we love Europe, we love the Netherlands in particular because they're the first people they traded with. I'm just fascinated by this place. Like, why would they build a theme park of the Netherlands? Except it's not just the Netherlands, obviously, because like, you know, in the same way you'd be forgiven for getting a difference between, I don't know, China and Hong Kong or like something like that confused. There's a lot of like just Europe that blurs here, so they sell French food and stuff like that. There's a hotel called the Europe Hotel, and it's like, yeah, it's Europe. So you'll see a lot more foreign influence here, and by that I mean like instead of just seeing this weird kind of mishmash of Japanese with a bit of like American because it's, you know, the standard de facto culture or whatever, but as well as seeing that mishmash, you also see a lot of other weird things such as, again, I can't get over this. It's a Dutch theme park inside Japan because they want to go to the Netherlands, but the Netherlands is really far away. You'd have to go to Tokyo, fly direct to Amsterdam. That'd be a whole thing, but you know what you can do? You can visit a theme park and do it here instead. I love that, it's crazy. There's things like tulip demonstrations. But yeah, you see a lot of different cultural mishmash than necessarily just Japanese plus American, which you'll see in a lot of different parts of Japan. So the second thing that Nagasaki is obviously notable for is the fact that it's only one of two cities in the history of humanity that has ever been hit by a nuclear bomb. And obviously that meant it was basically wiped out and kind of rebuilt from then on. So, you know, that means it's got a very different feel and vibe to the rest of Japan. But the way that affects the culture is honestly beyond what I would have guessed before I went to Hiroshima and had the kid come up to me with a note and be like, hey, you know, war, no matter how justified, is always a crime, and stuff like that. So something you might not realize about Japan is they don't have an army / a navy, etc. They have a self-defense force. This is because they're not legally, under their own constitution, allowed to do any aggressive actions. They have something to protect themselves and nothing beyond that. And one of the big reasons is in cities like this, they've seen the result of war. Like at the start, you know, like the Japanese expansion was going really well. It was going to be an opportunity for Asia to overcome its colonizers, but the end result was 2 of Japan's population centers being nuked. And although you could argue all day about the ethics of that, I think everyone can agree, like, let's not nuke people. Should be the good end result. But the fact that that has continuously changed, because the only 2 cities hit by a nuclear bomb ever are both fairly west in Japan terms. There's Hiroshima, there's Nagasaki. It not only affects the people who are hit by the blast, it not only affects the people for years afterwards who are obviously going to, you know, be dying of radiation, etc. But it also affects the general attitude of the people when it comes to war. They've seen what war can do, not just, oh yeah, some people didn't come back after they went away. Literally, people who were just sat home one day died one night, and that changes everything. And you can even see that in, like, oh yeah, the current proposals to expand Japanese self-defense to maybe be external, that's not well received here. And although you might say, well, I mean, they should pay for their own fair share or whatever, the reality is it's not down to money, it's down to the ethical concerns of war and aggression as a whole. I am currently in Amsterdam City. Oh no, I'm in Art Garden. That explains why there's nothing here. Guess we're gonna walk to Amsterdam. So I heard there was a beach in Okinawa that actually had a giant highway running across the view, and I didn't quite believe that you'd have a beach that was entirely overrun by a stretch of road, but apparently it's a thing. There's just a giant bridge, very busy one too, that just crosses right over the view of what would otherwise be a very nice beach. A lot of people come here regardless, so it's still a nice beach, you might argue. But there's something about this that just doesn't sit right with me. But anyway, I just had to come to it regardless. It's got a lot of negative ratings because, it's a nice beach besides the bridge, and I think that's pretty picky of you to say that. Anyway, let's get down to talking about the place that I'm on, the prefecture of Okinawa, which is mostly this big island, but there's a lot of other islands around here, which also are populated, also people on them. Let's talk a little bit about how this kind of comes to be, because when you assume a country has, you know, a certain amount of territory, you assume they've always had it, unless it's very recent, but it usually just like, oh yeah, that's always how Japan has been, that's always how the US has been, that's always how Germany must have been. But the truth is, every country has gone through huge territorial changes, and one of the biggest examples is Okinawa, which was only actually conquered by Japan in the late 1800s, and before that it'd gone back and forth between a whole bunch of different sets of hands. And when you start looking at a map, you can start to maybe understand why. The islands of Okinawa, in fact just Naha, the big city I'm near, is actually closer to the city of Taipei. It's closer to the city of Shanghai, to Seoul, even to Pyongyang than it is to Tokyo. And yeah, basically when the Japanese took over, they started to kind of force Japanesification, as you might call it, Japanification. And although that sounds terrible on the surface, it is something that happens to every country, like got some new territory, let's try and make it our own thing. But it's something that most people, especially when you have a unique culture and you're really far away, aren't necessarily fond of. So why is this place so different then? What is it that causes this to be different to the story which is told millions of times over, all over the world, and now is kind of wiped out, left to history? Why is it that Okinawa still has a distinct Okinawan culture and so many different unique things about the island, including the fact that, by the way, the people that live here statistically live the longest in the world? And that comes down to a few key factors. And even though this involves bringing it back to World War II again, obviously the fact that there was a giant war, one of the biggest battlefronts of which did lead on this island right here, had some of the heaviest casualties, and as you can imagine, that's going to lead to even more resentment. If there's already a big pile building, you can imagine having a lot of your people die at the behest of this large power is going to lead to even more of that. But the overall outcome led to an even worse situation, because nowadays, like I mentioned previously, Japan doesn't have its own army. It has a self-defense force, and then most of its kind of, let's call it offensive or power projection, comes from the United States. It's kind of interesting to think that one of the closest relationships in the world comes from a country that was nuclear bombed by another one, but it's the status quo. You know, you can... There's a cute cat. I don't know if that's a friendly meow or a go away meow. I'll assume it's the latter for now. But yeah, the situation is there are a lot of US military bases around the world. You know, the whole like, oh yeah, colonialism's really bad, except putting military bases everywhere. That's good. That's like for their own good, right? But yeah, there are a lot of military bases all around the world, including in Japan, and one of the most strategic points in Japan is Okinawa. It's kind of like an unsinkable aircraft carrier, and because of that, there is a huge number of US military installations. We're not just talking about one military base, we're not talking about 2 military bases, we're not even talking like, oh, a dozen of them. We're talking deep into the double digits, and then we're also talking about having tens of thousands of US military employees therefore stationed here, and there's been a lot of controversy stirred of them. Again, if the principle wasn't already hated enough, the actual practice is that there's a lot of problems that have resulted from that, even so much so that US military personnel cannot identify themselves on this island anymore. But yeah, it leads to this interesting situation where a country that didn't want to become part of a bigger country kind of unwittingly was forced into it, was kind of forced into their culture, and then it happened again. So, you know, Okinawa is part of Japan, but now Japan is under the military influence, the larger power influence of the United States, and then that leads to a weird three-tier situation. If you didn't like the Japanese taking over, forcing their military dominance on the islands, you're especially not going to like when someone takes over the Japanese and does it to them, because, like I said, the culture is distinct, the people are distinct, that's why they somehow managed to live so long, and it leads to a very interesting situation where even though you can, again, this is one of the big reasons I make this video, every single dimension of even a country as homogenous as this leads to a different situation, a different people with a different culture that has blended into a bigger mixing pot, if you like that phrase. But it doesn't mean they're the same. Every single country has this, many have it to much and more extreme extent, but yeah, the truth is so many countries are so diverse and so different that they might as well be a whole set of different countries. The idea of a country, even in terms of anything besides international diplomacy, where of course it makes sense because this one person is a representative for this many millions or hundreds of millions, but in the case of, like, if you're trying to use country as a way to define stereotypes, if you want to use country as a way to define, you know, like, I don't know, statistics, like per capita income or per this anything, that only really works as a generalization. It only really works on the broadest scale because every country has extremes. Every country has things where it doesn't make sense. You know, there are poorer parts, richer parts, there are weirder parts, less weird parts, more interesting parts, and really boring parts of every single country out there. And yeah, trying to use a statistic like saying, oh yeah, well, on average this is that, doesn't really make a lot of sense. In the same way that, you know, trying to say that, oh well, everyone in the world is really rich because the average person makes $8,000. I don't know if that's true. Throw the number on screen, let's see how good a guess that was. But you know, like, that might be true, but most people make a lot over that or a lot under that. Averages statistics are really good. This video isn't meant to denigrate them, but trying to imagine something and then applying it to 110 million people isn't effective. Trying to imagine something and applying it to 1.3 billion Chinese people isn't going to be effective. And yeah, it's something to keep in mind, I would say. And even if you disagree with that, even if you think countries are great generalizations and we should keep using them for various different statistics and immigration purposes and X, Y, Z, then let me know in the comments down below. I hope you all enjoyed seeing 4 very different parts of Japan. Regardless, you know, hit that thumbs up, because this video only took a lot of in case you're curious, by the way, it took a lot of trains, even in, like, with the bullet train in Japan, of course. You know, it's like 8 hours from north to south, and then it's like 6 from west to east, and then also a 2-hour flight. So like, if you wanted to see all 4 of these extremes, it's like you're talking minimum 16 hours in a country of like the highest end infrastructure. So I'm on Sakurajima right now, which is one of Japan's most volcanic islands. It's not related too much to the video, but you can see the volcano right there. It erupts something like 700 times a year. And you know what's great? This video isn't sponsored by volcanoes, it's sponsored by Skillshare instead. That's right, Skillshare is the learning platform where you can learn from not only thousands of courses, tens of thousands of different courses about all sorts of things, including one of the most valuable ones, because I hate editing. You'll notice that all the videos that I edit, they suck. You know, I'm bad at editing, and I also don't enjoy it. Pretty much every editor I know has learned through some form of course. I learned as I went along just by putting stuff together and trying to make it work to release the video, and I think that's one of the reasons I don't like it so much. And because people like the editor in this video, Kobe in History, have learned through actual you know, sources and reasons and courses, that means that right now, can you see all this editing on the screen? That's only possible because of learning through courses like the one at Skillshare, which you can get a 2-month free premium trial to by clicking the link in the description. And I'm mentioning that because if you click that link, even if you're like, you know, I'm not too sure about that one, make sure you do check it out, because if you do click the link, if you do sign up, it sends Skillshare the message that yeah, these sponsorships work, and that's something I'd really appreciate you doing for me. But regardless, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Hope that I don't die to a volcano, and I guess I hope that I'll see you all in another video. Second channel, don't care. Goodbye. Are you stuck in a ditch, or? What's up there, baby? Okay, there we go. That's the solution. No, that's not the solution. Are you broken? Oh.